Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're diving into something absolutely wild, and I mean wild. We're talking about why you wouldn't last a single day in Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Before you get too comfortable in your chair, thinking, oh, how hard could it be? Let me stop you right there. Hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of deep historical dive. Subscribe if you haven't already. And seriously, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this content travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a snack. But honestly, you might lose your appetite by the end of this. We're about to transport you back to the year 1519, right before everything changed forever. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning, but instead of your cozy bedroom, you're standing on a narrow causeway surrounded by the largest lake you've ever seen. The air is thin. We're talking 7,250 feet above sea level here. Your lungs are already working overtime. The sun is blazing down, but there's something else hitting you immediately. The smell. It's not just one smell. It's a cocktail of human sweat. Exotic foods you can't identify, burning copal incense, fresh flowers, and underneath it all, something metallic and dark that makes your stomach turn. That's blood, by the way. Fresh blood. And if you think that's bad, just wait. You're about to spend 24 hours in the most magnificent, terrifying, and absolutely lethal city that ever existed in the Americas. A city so incredible that when Spanish conquistadors first saw it, they literally thought they were dreaming. But here's the thing. They were trained soldiers with armor, weapons, and horses. You've got whatever you're wearing right now and a smartphone that definitely won't work here. So buckle up, because we're about to find out exactly why your modern sensibilities, your delicate constitution, and your complete ignorance of Aztec social customs would get you killed before lunch. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Welcome to Hell. I mean, you open your eyes to the most beautiful sunrise you've ever seen reflecting off an enormous lake. For about 3 seconds, you think you've died and gone to heaven. Then reality hits. You're standing on what looks like a stone bridge stretching across miles of water. And walking toward you are people who look like they stepped out of a fever dream. Elaborate feathered headdresses, gold jewelry that catches the morning light, and clothing so intricate it puts modern fashion to shame. But their faces are looking at you like you're the weird one. And you are. First problem, you stick out like a smartphone at a Renaissance fair. Your clothes, your skin tone if you're not indigenous, your complete confusion. Everything about you screams, I don't belong here. In a society where conformity isn't just preferred but literally a matter of life and death, this is already strike one against you. The causeway you're on is called the Tlacpan, and it's one of 3 major stone bridges connecting the island city of Tenochtitlan to the mainland. It's about 4 miles long and wide enough for 10 horses to walk side by side. Except horses don't exist here yet. Instead, you're sharing the road with merchants carrying impossibly heavy loads, warriors with obsidian-edged clubs that could slice you in half, and the occasional noble in a feathered litter that looks like something from a mythology book. Here's your first real problem. You have no idea how to act around any of these people. See that guy approaching with the elaborate headdress and jade jewelry? That's probably a noble, maybe even related to the emperor. In Aztec society, you're supposed to approach him with your eyes downcast, speaking in a special honorific form of Nahuatl that you absolutely don't know, while making specific hand gestures that show proper respect. What are you going to do instead? Probably wave and say, hey, like you're meeting your neighbor at the mailbox. Congratulations. You just committed a grave social offense that could get you executed. But wait, it gets worse, because you don't speak Nahuatl, the Aztec language, at all. When people start shouting at you, asking who you are, where you're from, what calpulli, neighborhood you belong to, you're going to stand there with your mouth open like a fish. In a society where everyone knows everyone else's place in the social hierarchy, being unable to identify yourself is essentially admitting you're either a spy, a runaway slave, or completely insane. None of these options end well for you. The crowd gathering around you is getting agitated. Their voices are rising. You catch a word that sounds familiar. Teotl. If you knew any Aztec mythology, you'd know this means God or divine. They might think you're a god because you look so strange. That sounds good, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because if they decide you're a malevolent god or a demon, which is way more likely given your obvious confusion and strange appearance, they're going to solve that problem the traditional way, with obsidian knives, while you're still alive, as an offering to the real gods to protect them from whatever evil you represent. Let's pause here for a second. I know this sounds intense, but this is based on actual historical accounts. The Aztecs weren't just casually violent. They had a complex religious and social system where human sacrifice was considered not only normal but necessary for the survival of the universe. To them, offering human hearts to the gods was like paying taxes. Unpleasant, but absolutely essential. From your modern perspective, this seems insane. From their perspective, people who refused to participate in maintaining cosmic balance through sacrifice were the insane ones. So here you are, 5 minutes into your day in Tenochtitlan, already marked as a suspicious outsider who can't speak the language, doesn't know the customs, and might be supernatural. The crowd is getting bigger, angrier, and more convinced that you're some kind of threat. What's your move? Run? Where exactly are you going to run to on a narrow causeway surrounded by a lake? Fight? Against people who've been warriors since childhood, using weapons you can't even identify? Your best bet is to do what the Spanish did when they first arrived. Fall to your knees, put your hands together like you're praying, and hope someone interprets this as religious respect rather than foreign weirdness. Maybe, and I emphasize maybe, someone takes pity on you and decides you're just a lost, simple-minded person rather than a demon. Maybe they decide to bring you into the city instead of sacrificing you on the spot. Congratulations. You've survived your first 5 minutes. Only 23 hours and 55 minutes to go. Chapter 2. The City of Dreams and Nightmares. If you thought the causeway was overwhelming, wait until you get your first look at the actual city. Picture the most impressive urban landscape you've ever seen. New York, Tokyo, London, whatever blew your mind the first time you saw it. Now multiply that feeling by about 1,000, because you're looking at something that shouldn't exist. Tenochtitlan in 1519 was home to between 200,000 and 300,000 people. To put that in perspective, only 4 cities in all of Europe were that large. Paris, the biggest city you would have known in the European world, had maybe 100,000 people. You're looking at one of the 5 largest cities on Earth, built on an island in the middle of a lake, connected by causeways and canals, with architecture that makes European cathedrals look like garden sheds. The first thing that hits you, besides the continued smell, which we'll get to, is the impossible geometry of the place. The city is laid out in a perfect grid, with canals running parallel to streets like some kind of American Venice. Except Venice is a decaying collection of medieval buildings slowly sinking into the sea, and this is a vibrant, planned metropolis that looks like it was designed by someone who'd seen the future. Pyramids rise from the center of the city like stone mountains, their sides painted in colors so bright they hurt your eyes. The largest one, the Templo Mayor, towers 150 feet above the plaza, its twin temples dedicated to the rain god Tlaloc and the war god Huitzilopochtli. You can see people climbing the steps, tiny as ants from this distance, carrying objects you really hope aren't what you think they are. But it's not just the big architecture that amazes you, it's the details. Every building, every wall, every surface is covered in intricate carvings, paintings, mosaics made from stones and feathers and precious metals. It's like someone took the entire city and decided every square inch needed to be a work of art. The houses rise in terraces from the water, and you realize with growing amazement that many of them have actual gardens on their roofs. Not just decorative gardens. We're talking full agricultural plots where people are growing corn, beans, tomatoes, and flowers. The whole city is basically a massive urban farm that somehow feeds a population the size of a modern major city without any of the technology you'd think they'd need. And the sound. Oh man, the sound. It's not the white noise of modern cities, cars, air conditioning, electronic hums. It's completely organic, but impossibly complex. Thousands of people talking in a language that sounds like music, the splash of canoe paddles in the canals, the tap-tap-tapping of craftsmen working stone and metal, drums echoing from the temples, the calls of exotic birds, and underneath it all, a sound you can't quite identify but makes your skin crawl. That's the sound of obsidian, volcanic glass sharper than any metal, being napped into blades, spear points, and ritual knives. Chip, 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 like someone sharpening the world's deadliest manicure tools. But let's talk about what's really messing with your head right now, the people. Everyone you see looks like they stepped out of an art museum. And I don't mean that metaphorically. The clothes, the jewelry, the makeup, the way they carry themselves, it's also aesthetically perfect that it makes modern fashion look like we gave up trying. The men have elaborate hairstyles that probably took hours to arrange, with feathers and gold ornaments woven into intricate patterns. Their clothes aren't just functional, they're canvases. Geometric patterns and colors that seem to glow, made from dyes you've never heard of. Cloaks that shimmer like they're made of liquid metal, which in some cases, they basically are. The women are even more stunning. Their hair is braided with ribbons and flowers, their faces painted in patterns that emphasize their features in ways that would make modern makeup artists weep with envy. Their dresses are works of art, with embroidered designs so complex you could stare at them for hours and keep finding new details. But here's what's really getting to you. Everyone looks healthy. Impossibly, unnaturally healthy. No one is overweight, no one has bad teeth, no one has the pasty complexion of someone who spends their days under fluorescent lights. These people are all lean, muscular, bronze-skinned, and moving with the kind of physical confidence that comes from a lifetime of actual physical activity. You, meanwhile, are probably already breathing hard from walking a few hundred yards at altitude. Your skin is already starting to burn in the mountain sun, and you're realizing that your daily workout routine of walking from your car to your office isn't exactly preparing you for life in a city where everyone is basically a part-time athlete. Let me interrupt the story for a second to talk about something fascinating. The Aztecs had better dental hygiene than Europeans would have for another 300 years. They chewed gum made from tree resin to clean their teeth, used herbs to freshen their breath, and considered personal cleanliness a religious duty. The average Aztec took more baths in a week than the average European took in a year. Meanwhile, you haven't showered since yesterday, and you're about to spend a day in a city where body odor is considered not just rude, but spiritually offensive. So there you are, shuffling through the most beautiful, overwhelming, and sanitary city you've ever seen, looking and smelling like what these people would consider the absolute dregs of humanity. But we haven't even gotten to the real challenges yet. Because you haven't eaten anything, you don't know where you're allowed to go, you have no money that's worth anything here, you don't understand the social rules that govern every interaction, and oh yeah, you've never seen a single food item that they eat in this entire city. Hope you're not a picky eater. Because we're about to find out exactly what's on the menu in paradise. Chapter 3, Breakfast of Champions and Nightmares. Your stomach is growling. It's been growling for the last hour as the smell of cooking food has been wafting over you from every direction. Some of it smells amazing, like nothing you've ever encountered, but amazing. Some of it smells questionable, and some of it smells like something died and was then cooked with exotic spices to hide the fact that it died. You've stumbled into what the locals call the Great Market of Tlatelolco, and great doesn't begin to describe it. This isn't a farmer's market with some tomatoes and artisanal bread. This is a commercial center that serves the entire Valley of Mexico, with over 60,000 people shopping here every day. It's like if Amazon was a physical place run by people who thought presentation was a religious art form. The market is laid out in sections so organized it would make a German efficiency expert weep with joy. There's the Feather District, where merchants sell plumes from birds you've never heard of in colors that don't seem physically possible. The jewelry section, where gold and jade are worked into designs that look like they were made by aliens with really good taste. The tool area, where obsidian blades are displayed like surgical instruments, which technically they are. And then there's the food section. Oh boy, the food section. Let's start with what looks familiar. There are vendors selling what are clearly corn tortillas, and your modern brain thinks, great, Mexican food, I can handle this. You approach a stall where a woman is making fresh tortillas on a clay griddle, and the smell is incredible. Nutty, earthy, with a hint of smoke. You point at the tortillas and mime eating. The woman looks at you strangely, probably because you didn't use the proper formal greeting and you're pointing like a barbarian, but she nods and hands you a warm tortilla. Here's your first surprise. It tastes nothing like what you think Mexican food tastes like. This corn has been treated with lime ash in a process called nixtamalization, which gives it a completely different flavor than modern corn. It's earthier, more complex, with an almost mineral taste that's totally foreign to your palate. But okay, it's not bad. You're managing. Then the woman starts piling things on top of your tortilla. First, what looks like beans, except when you bite into them, they're not beans at all. They're some kind of larvae. Beetle larvae, specifically, harvested from lake plants and considered a delicacy. They're crunchy, with a nutty flavor that's actually not terrible, but your brain is screaming, "You're eating bugs," loud enough to wake the dead. Next comes what looks like green vegetables. Again, not exactly. It's algae, literal pond scum that's been harvested, dried, and formed into little cakes. The Aztecs call it tequitlatl, and it's incredibly nutritious. Basically a superfood that won't be discovered by health food enthusiasts for another 500 years. But you're eating pond scum for breakfast, and your stomach is beginning to have opinions about this. The woman isn't done. She adds what looks like salsa, and thank God something normal. Except the first bite nearly takes your head off. This isn't mild salsa verde. This is made from chiles that make modern habaneros look like bell peppers. Your eyes are watering, your nose is running, and you're making sounds that are attracting attention from other market goers. But wait, there's more. She adds what looks like small pieces of meat. Finally, protein. You can identify, except it's dog. Hairless dog, specifically bred for eating. The Aztecs domesticated these dogs, called Soloits quintly, specifically as a food source, and they're considered a luxury item. You're now eating bugs, pond scum, chile that could strip paint, and man's best friend, all wrapped in a tortilla that tastes like it was made from ancient corn. How are you feeling? But here's the thing that's really messing with you. Everyone else is eating this like it's the most normal thing in the world. Kids are happily chomping on cricket tacos. Elderly people are carefully eating bowls of algae soup. Muscular warriors are downing cups of chocolate, except their chocolate is mixed with chile and doesn't have any sugar, so it's bitter, spicy, and probably would taste to you like someone made hot chocolate with baker's cocoa and cayenne pepper. Speaking of drinks, you're getting thirsty, and you see people drinking what looks like water. But when you try to ask for some, you discover that the Aztecs don't just drink plain water if they can help it. Their beverages include pulque, fermented agave juice that's mildly alcoholic and has the consistency of thin yogurt. It's the national drink, and everyone from children to grandparents drinks it because it's safer than water and provides essential nutrients. Chocolate, but not the sweet stuff, you know. This is bitter, spicy, and often mixed with honey if you're lucky, chili if you're not. Atole, a corn-based drink that's basically liquid tortilla, sometimes flavored with fruit, sometimes with things you'd rather not think about. Your other option is straight water from the lake, which, let me put this gently, is the same lake that the entire city uses as a combination sewer system, transportation network, and food source. The Aztecs have figured out ways to purify it somewhat, but your modern immune system has never encountered the particular collection of bacteria, parasites, and microorganisms that call Lake Texcoco home. Drink the lake water, and you'll be introduced to diseases that don't even have names yet. Don't drink anything, and you'll dehydrate in the mountain sun and thin air. Choose your poison, literally. But let's say you're being smart about this. You're sticking to the pulque. Fermented drinks are generally safer because the alcohol kills some of the nasties. The problem is, you're not used to drinking alcohol first thing in the morning. You're at altitude. You haven't eaten anything substantial that your stomach recognizes as food, and you're under more stress than you've ever experienced in your life. You're about to be drunk, nauseated, and terrified, all at the same time. In a city where being drunk in public can be a capital offense for common people. Oh, did I not mention that? The Aztecs had strict laws about public intoxication. If you were a commoner and got caught drunk in public, the punishment could range from having your head shaved, a major social humiliation, to being stoned to death, depending on the circumstances and how many times you'd been caught. Nobles could get away with more, but you're obviously not a noble. And here's where your morning gets really interesting, because you've attracted the attention of what looks like law enforcement. The Aztecs had market inspectors whose job was to maintain order, ensure fair trading, and deal with troublemakers. They're dressed in official-looking clothes with symbols you don't recognize, carrying clubs with obsidian blades, and they're looking at you like you're the most suspicious person they've ever seen. Which, to be fair, you probably are. They're asking you questions in rapid-fire Nahuatl. Who are you? What Kapoli do you belong to? Who's your master if you're a slave? Where are your identification papers? What are you doing drinking in the morning? Why do you look so strange? Why don't you know how to behave properly? And you're standing there with pond scum on your face, slightly drunk on pulque, trying to mime that you're lost. This is not going well. The crowd that's gathering around you isn't friendly curious anymore. They're starting to look hostile. Someone in the back is shouting something that includes the word Tlatlacate Colotl, which means sorcerer or shapeshifter. Someone else is yelling Nahuali, witch. The market inspectors are looking less confused and more concerned. In a society where maintaining order is literally a matter of life and death, unexplained weirdness gets dealt with quickly and decisively. Your options are getting limited fast. You can try to run through a crowded market where everyone knows the layout except you, while drunk at altitude, pursued by people who've been running at altitude their entire lives. Try to fight against multiple armed law enforcement officers, using weapons that can decapitate you while you're impaired and have no idea how to use any of the weapons available. Try to surrender and hope for mercy from people whose concept of mercy might involve a quick death instead of a slow one. Or try to communicate that you're just lost and confused to people who are becoming increasingly convinced that you're some kind of supernatural threat to public order. What's it going to be? Chapter 4, Law and Order, Aztec Edition. You've made the smart choice, hands up, surrender position, trying to look as non-threatening as possible while slightly drunk on breakfast alcohol. The market inspectors approach cautiously. After all, if you really are some kind of sorcerer, getting too close might be dangerous. One of them, who seems to be in charge, starts speaking in a more formal tone. You don't understand the words, but the cadence is familiar. It's the same rhythm police officers use everywhere when they're reading you your rights. Except he's reading them in Nahuatl, and the rights are different. If you could understand him, here's what you'd be hearing. By the authority of the Huey Tlatoani and the laws of Tenochtitlan, you are suspected of being a foreign spy, a sorcerer, or a person without proper social standing. You will be brought before a judge for questioning. If you resist, you will be subdued. If you attempt to cast spells or call upon evil spirits, you will be killed immediately. If you are found guilty of crimes against the state or the gods, you may be enslaved, exiled, or sacrificed according to the nature of your offense. Feel better? Your hands are being tied behind your back with rope made from agave fibers. It's strong, well-made, and surprisingly comfortable for something that's restraining you. The Aztecs were excellent at pretty much everything they did, including prisoner restraint. You're being led through the market, and everyone is staring. Not just curious stares, we're talking about the kind of intense scrutiny that makes you want to crawl under a rock and die. Some people are making hand gestures that are probably meant to ward off evil. Others are following along to see what happens next. This is the most entertainment some of these people have had in weeks. The building you're being taken to is clearly official. It's made of carved stone with intricate decorations that probably took months to complete. And there are guards at the entrance wearing uniforms that scream, "Don't mess with us." These aren't market inspectors. These are professional warriors whose full-time job is maintaining order in the city. They're armed with maquahuitl, wooden clubs embedded with obsidian blades that are basically medieval chainsaws. One hit from these weapons can break bones. 2 hits can cut you in half. They're also carrying spears, shields decorated with feathers and precious metals, and they move like people who've spent their entire lives learning how to kill efficiently. Inside, the building is cool, dark, and intimidating as hell. The walls are covered with murals depicting what happens to criminals and enemies of the state. And let's just say the Aztec approach to crime and punishment makes modern prisons look like summer camps. There are scenes of people being flayed alive, hearts being cut out, heads being removed, and various other activities that would get the entire building shut down if this were a modern courthouse. But this isn't meant to be decorative art. It's educational. These murals are showing you exactly what happens to people who break the law. The message is clear: don't. You're brought before a judge, a man whose elaborate clothing and demeanor make it clear he's important. He's wearing a cloak with geometric patterns that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime, jewelry that catches the light from torches on the walls, and an expression that suggests he's seen it all and isn't impressed by any of it. The judge speaks to the market inspectors who give their report. You can't understand the words, but you can guess the content. We found this weirdo acting strangely in the market. He can't speak properly, doesn't know how to behave, and was drinking in public. We think he might be a spy or a sorcerer. The judge looks at you with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly annoying puzzle. He asks you direct questions in Nahuatl, and when you don't respond appropriately, he tries a few other languages. Maybe Mayan, maybe Otomi, maybe other regional dialects. Nothing. You're not responding to anything in a way that makes sense. Here's where the Aztec legal system gets interesting. They're actually quite sophisticated about jurisprudence. They have detailed laws, proper procedures, evidence requirements, and even something resembling the presumption of innocence. But all of that assumes you can participate in the legal process. You can't identify yourself, you can't explain your presence, you can't respond to questions, and you can't demonstrate that you have any legitimate place in Aztec society. In their legal system, this presents a serious problem. If you're a foreign spy, you're a threat to national security. If you're a sorcerer, you're a supernatural threat. If you're just mentally impaired, you might be harmless, but you're still a burden on society with no clear place in the social hierarchy. None of these options have great outcomes. The judge is consulting with advisors, other officials who help interpret law and custom. They're looking at you, talking among themselves, occasionally pointing at aspects of your appearance that clearly don't make sense to them. Your clothes are a dead giveaway that you're not from anywhere in Mesoamerica. The fabric, the cut, the style, none of it matches anything in their experience. Your skin might be wrong for the region, or your hair is certainly styled in a way that doesn't match any cultural group they know about. But here's the thing that's really confusing them. You don't look like you're starving, you don't look like you've been traveling for weeks, and you don't show any signs of being a refugee from war or disaster. You look like someone who just appeared, which isn't possible unless you're supernatural. And if you're supernatural, the question becomes, are you good supernatural or bad supernatural? The judge makes a decision. He's going to have you examined by priests who specialize in identifying supernatural entities and curses. If they determine you're harmless, you might be enslaved or adopted into someone's household. If they determine you're dangerous, well, we've all seen the murals on the walls. You're being moved again, this time toward the temple district. As you walk through the city, you get your first good look at daily life in Tenochtitlan, and despite your current situation, it's absolutely fascinating. The streets are cleaner than any medieval European city. There are people whose job it is to sweep and maintain public areas, and they take that job seriously. The canal system not only provides transportation, but also helps with sanitation. Waste and garbage are carefully managed and disposed of. People are going about their daily business with an efficiency and purpose that's impressive. Craftsmen are working in open workshops, creating goods that would be priceless artifacts in any modern museum. Children are playing games in the streets under the careful supervision of adults. Women are washing clothes in the canals, their conversations and laughter carrying over the water. It's a functioning, thriving city with a quality of life that's arguably better than most places in the world at that time. Too bad you're probably about to be sacrificed to the gods. Chapter 5. Meeting the God Squad. The smell hits you first. Copal incense, a resin that produces thick, aromatic smoke when burned, mixed with something floral and sweet, underlaid by that metallic smell you're starting to recognize as dried blood. Lots of dried blood. You're being led up stone steps toward a temple complex that makes European cathedrals look like garden sheds. The architecture is overwhelming. Massive pyramids covered in intricate carvings and paintings, courtyards that could hold thousands of people, and everywhere you look, symbols and designs that clearly mean something important to the people around you, but look like alien hieroglyphics to your modern eyes. The priests you're being taken to see aren't anything like what your cultural background might have prepared you for. These aren't gentle, contemplative religious figures in simple robes. These are people who look like they could handle themselves in a fight, wearing elaborate costumes that cost more than some people's houses, with ritualistic scars and body modifications that indicate their rank and specialization. The head priest, you can tell he's in charge because his headdress is so elaborate it probably has its own zip code, looks at you with the clinical interest of a doctor examining an unusual patient. Except in this case, the diagnosis might determine whether you live or die. He walks around you, slowly, examining you from every angle while muttering in what sounds like a more archaic form of Nahuatl, probably ritual language. He's looking at your clothes, your hair, your skin, your eyes, even your fingernails. Every detail is being cataloged and analyzed. Then he starts the supernatural detection process. First, he waves burning copal around you while chanting. The smoke is so thick you start coughing, which apparently means something to him because he nods and makes a note to an assistant. Then he pulls out what looks like a crystal, probably obsidian or quartz, and holds it up to examine you through it, like a primitive supernatural magnifying glass. Next comes a test you definitely weren't expecting. He pulls out a small bag of what looks like seeds or beans and throws them on the ground around your feet. The way they land apparently tells him something about your spiritual nature, because he's studying the pattern like it's the most important thing in the world. Here's what's actually happening. The Aztecs had a sophisticated system for identifying spiritual threats and supernatural entities. They believed that shapeshifters, Nahuali, witches, and malevolent spirits would react in specific ways to certain tests. The copal smoke test was supposed to reveal magical auras. The crystal was used to see through supernatural disguises. The seed divination was meant to reveal hidden spiritual connections. From their perspective, this is a perfectly reasonable scientific investigation. From your perspective, you're being examined by someone who might decide your fate based on how some beans fell on the ground. The examination continues. The priest brings out a mirror made of polished obsidian, a volcanic glass so perfectly smooth it reflects like black water. He holds it up to your face and watches your reflection carefully. Apparently, supernatural entities sometimes don't reflect properly, or their reflections show their true forms. Your reflection looks perfectly normal to you, but the priest is frowning. He tilts the mirror, moves it closer, steps back, examines it from different angles. Something about what he's seeing is bothering him. Then he does something that nearly gives you a heart attack. He pulls out an obsidian blade, not a big sacrificial knife, just a small, sharp tool, and makes a tiny cut on your arm, just enough to draw a drop of blood. He examines the blood carefully, the color, the way it flows, how quickly it coagulates. In Aztec belief, supernatural entities often had blood that was different from humans, darker, lighter, or with unusual properties. Your blood looks disappointingly normal, but that's not necessarily good news. The priest confers with his assistants, pointing at you and gesturing in ways that clearly indicate they're discussing your fate. You catch a few repeated words. Teotl, God. Tlatlacatecalotl, sorcerer. Cocolistli, disease. That last one should worry you, because one theory they're considering is that you might be a disease spirit, a supernatural entity that brings plague and death. The Aztecs understood that diseases could spread from person to person, and they took quarantine very seriously. If they decide you're a walking epidemic, the solution is simple and permanent. After what feels like hours, but is probably only 20 minutes, the head priest reaches a conclusion. He approaches you with a serious expression and begins what is clearly a formal pronouncement. If you could understand him, here's what you'd be hearing. This being is not from any land we know. It speaks no proper language and follows no customs we recognize. It shows no signs of being a god, but also no clear signs of being a demon. Its blood is normal, but its presence here is impossible by natural means. We believe it may be a lost soul or a person affected by powerful sorcery. It should be taken to the palace for examination by the royal priests and diviners. Until then, it should be kept under guard but treated as a potentially human being rather than a supernatural threat. This is actually the best possible outcome. You're not being immediately sacrificed, which is great. You're being transferred to higher authorities, which could be good or bad depending on their conclusions. And you're being classified as potentially human, which means you'll be treated according to laws governing people rather than procedures for dealing with monsters. Of course, you don't know any of this. From your perspective, there was a lot of chanting, some uncomfortable poking and prodding, a scary moment with a knife, and now you're being handed off to a new set of armed guards. But at least you're still breathing. Chapter 6. Palace. Intrigue and protocol. Nightmares. The palace complex of the Huey Tlatoani, the great speaker, essentially the emperor, makes everything else you've seen look modest by comparison. This isn't just a building. It's a small city within the city, covering several acres with courtyards, gardens, administrative buildings, residences, workshops, and areas you can't even identify. The architecture is mind-blowing. Walls covered in murals that tell stories you don't understand, carved stone pillars that rise like forest trees, courtyards with pools and fountains that would make Roman engineers jealous. Everything is painted in colors so vibrant they seem to glow. Deep blues from crushed stones, reds from cochineal insects, yellows from exotic flowers, and gold leaf applied with such skill it looks like the walls themselves are made of precious metal. Your guards lead you through corridors where every surface tells a story. There are murals depicting the history of the Aztec people, their migration from the mythical Aztlan, the founding of Tenochtitlan, great military victories, the reigns of previous emperors. There are maps showing the extent of the empire, tribute lists recording what each conquered province must provide annually, and genealogies tracing the royal bloodline back to the gods themselves. You're getting a crash course in Aztec history and you don't even realize it. The people you pass in these corridors are clearly important. Their clothing is more elaborate than anything you saw on the market, their jewelry more intricate, their bearing more confident. These are nobles, high priests, government administrators, military commanders, and court officials whose decisions affect the lives of millions of people. And they're all staring at you. Word travels fast in a palace, especially word about something as unusual as a mysterious person who appeared from nowhere, speaks no known language and might be supernatural. By now, everyone in the complex has heard about you, and they're all curious to get a look. Some of their expressions are curious, some are suspicious, and a few look downright hostile. You're a disruption to the careful order that keeps this empire functioning, and disruptions are generally not appreciated. Your destination turns out to be a waiting chamber near the imperial audience halls. It's a room that's probably meant to be comfortable. There are woven mats to sit on, water basins for washing, and even some food, but the walls are decorated with murals showing what happens to enemies of the state. So the overall effect is less comfortable waiting room, and more luxurious death row holding cell. The food is actually interesting. There are fruits you've never seen, some that look like small avocados, others that resemble berries, but with unusual colors and textures. There are different types of tortillas, some made with ingredients you can't identify. There's chocolate, but again, it's bitter and spiced rather than sweet. And there's meat. Several kinds of meat actually prepared in ways that look appetizing. You're starving by now, so you try some. Here's what you're eating. Turkey, familiar. Venison, also familiar. Duck, getting more exotic. Iguana, okay, that's new. And something the serving person indicates with gestures is a special delicacy. It's human. Not a lot, just a small portion mixed in with the other meats, but unmistakably human flesh prepared as food. This isn't some barbaric ritual cannibalism, it's cuisine. The Aztecs practiced ritual cannibalism on specific religious occasions, and the flesh of sacrificial victims was considered sacred food, often served to nobility and warriors as a way of sharing in the spiritual power of the sacrifice. From their perspective, this is both an honor and a religious observance. From your perspective, you've just eaten human flesh for lunch. How are you feeling about that afternoon snack now? The truly disturbing part isn't just that you've eaten human meat, it's that it actually tasted good. It was well prepared, seasoned with herbs and spices that enhanced the flavor, and served as part of a meal that was clearly created by people who took their cooking seriously. This raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of taboos, the relativity of cultural norms, and exactly how much of your moral framework is based on cultural conditioning rather than universal principles. But you probably don't have time to contemplate the philosophical implications of accidental cannibalism because you're about to meet the Emperor. Chapter 7, Meeting the God King. The chamber you're brought to is so impressive it makes your brain struggle to process it. The ceiling is at least 30 feet high, supported by columns carved to look like stylized trees. The walls are covered in murals depicting the emperor receiving tribute from conquered nations, presiding over religious ceremonies, and consulting with the gods themselves. At the far end of the room, on a throne that looks like it was carved from a single massive stone and inlaid with every precious material the empire could provide, sits the most intimidating human being you've ever seen. This is Moctezuma II, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin in Nahuatl, the 9th Aztec emperor and ruler of an empire that stretches from coast to coast. He's in his 50s, but he carries himself with the physical presence of someone much younger. His clothing is indescribable, a combination of art, engineering, and religious symbolism that probably took months to create. His headdress alone is a masterpiece, Hundreds of quetzal feathers arranged in patterns that seem to shift and change as he moves, interwoven with gold ornaments, jade beads, and symbolic elements that represent his connection to various gods. His cloak is made from feathers so fine they look like fabric, with geometric patterns that hurt your eyes to look at directly. But it's not just the clothing that makes him impressive. This is a man who has ruled one of the world's largest empires for 17 years. He's conquered dozens of cities, overseen massive public works projects, and managed tribute from millions of subjects, and maintained the delicate balance of military, religious, and administrative power that keeps the Aztec world functioning. He's also believed by his people to be a living god, chosen by the deities themselves to rule on Earth. And he's looking at you with the expression of someone trying to solve an extremely complicated and potentially dangerous puzzle. The protocol for approaching the Emperor is complex and specific. You're supposed to approach with your eyes downcast, speaking only when spoken to, using the most formal and respectful forms of address, and following precise ceremonial procedures that demonstrate your understanding of your place in the cosmic hierarchy. Instead, you're probably staring at him with your mouth open like a tourist seeing the Statue of Liberty for the first time. This is not the proper way to greet a living god. Moctezuma speaks, and his voice carries the authority of someone who has never been disobeyed. The interpreter, because of course there's an interpreter, this is a sophisticated imperial court, translates his words into simpler Nahuatl, then tries a few other languages to see if you respond. Nothing, you understand nothing, and your lack of response is becoming increasingly problematic. Here's what Moctezuma is thinking. The Spanish haven't arrived yet. That won't happen for another few months. But there have been omens. Strange lights in the sky, temples spontaneously catching fire, birds acting unusually, reports of unusual events from throughout the empire. The priests have been predicting that something significant is coming, possibly involving the return of the god Quetzalcoatl. And now you've appeared. A person who doesn't fit any known category, speaks no recognizable language, and somehow materialized in his empire without anyone knowing how you got there. From his perspective, you're either connected to the prophecies of change and upheaval that have been troubling his priests, or you're some kind of elaborate trick being played by his enemies. Either way, you represent a threat to the stability of his empire. The questioning begins in earnest. Through interpreters, he asks about your origins, your purpose, your loyalties, your knowledge of military matters, your understanding of the lands beyond the empire. He wants to know if you're a spy, an advanced scout for invading armies, supernatural messenger, or something else entirely. Your complete inability to answer any of these questions is making everyone in the room increasingly nervous. In Aztec political theory, everything happens for a reason, usually a reason connected to the will of the gods or the machinations of enemies. Random events don't occur. Unexplained appearances don't happen. Your presence here must mean something, and until they figure out what that meaning is, you represent an unacceptable level of uncertainty in a system that depends on predictability and control. Moctezuma makes a decision. You're going to be kept under close observation while they try to figure out what you are and what your appearance means. You'll be housed in the palace, provided with food and basic necessities, but watched constantly. You'll be examined by the Empire's best priests, diviners, and wise men. And if at any point they conclude that you're a threat to the Empire, you'll be dealt with accordingly. This is actually not a bad outcome. Palace accommodations in Tenochtitlan are probably more luxurious than anything you've experienced in your modern life. The food is exotic, but generally edible. The intellectual attention you're getting from some of the smartest people in Mesoamerica is flattering, even if you can't understand what they're saying. But you're essentially under house arrest in an empire where the penalty for most serious crimes is death, and nobody has figured out yet whether you're harmless, dangerous, or something else entirely. Chapter 8. Life under divine surveillance. Your accommodations in the palace are objectively incredible. You've been given a room that's larger than many modern apartments, with walls covered in murals, furniture that's both functional and artistic, and a private garden area where you can sit among flowers that smell amazing and birds that sing songs you've never heard. There's a pool fed by fresh spring water. The Aztecs engineered an aqueduct system that brings clean water from the mountains directly into the palace. The water is cleaner than what most people had access to anywhere in the world in 1519. Your bathroom facilities are more sophisticated than what most medieval Europeans ever dreamed of. The food is a constant adventure. Every meal brings new flavors, new ingredients, new preparation methods. There are fruits that taste like combinations of familiar flavors, something that's part mango, part peach, part something you can't identify. There are vegetables prepared in ways that make them taste completely different from anything in your experience. And there's chocolate. Real chocolate. Prepared the way the Aztecs invented it. It's bitter, complex, sometimes spiced with chile or vanilla, and completely unlike the sweet candy you're used to. It's also mildly psychoactive. The Aztecs used chocolate in religious ceremonies, partly because it produces a mild euphoric effect. You're getting high on historically authentic hot chocolate. There are worse fates. But you're also constantly watched. There are always at least 2 guards present, and they rotate regularly so they don't get complacent. There are servants who bring you everything you need, but who are obviously also reporting on your every action. There are priests who come to examine you regularly, trying different tests and observations to figure out your true nature. And there are scholars. The Aztec Empire had a sophisticated intellectual class, people whose job was to maintain historical records, study astronomy, develop new agricultural techniques, and generally expand human knowledge. They're fascinated by you because you represent a completely new category of thing to study. They bring you maps, trying to get you to indicate where you come from. The maps are works of art in themselves, detailed drawings showing the entire known world from the Aztec perspective. There's the Valley of Mexico at the center, surrounded by conquered territories with trade routes extending to the edges of the known world. When you can't point to any location on their maps, they bring you materials and try to get you to draw your own map. Your artistic skills probably aren't up to the task, but you try to sketch something that might indicate you're from very far away. They show you samples of different materials, metals, stones, fabrics, woods, to see if you recognize anything from your homeland. They bring you tools and weapons to see if you know how to use any of them. They show you religious symbols and watch your reactions to determine your spiritual beliefs. Everything you do or don't do gets recorded and analyzed. You're the subject of the most intensive anthropological study in history, except the anthropologists are Aztec intellectuals trying to figure out if you're human, divine, or something else entirely. The language lessons are constant. Different people take turns trying to teach you Nahuatl, starting with basic concepts and working up to more complex ideas. You're a slow learner from their perspective, but you're actually making progress. After a few days, you can manage basic greetings, simple requests for food and water, and you're starting to recognize common words. But your pronunciation is terrible. Nahuatl has sounds that don't exist in most modern languages, and your attempts to say them sound wrong to native speakers. It's like trying to speak Chinese when you only know English. Even when you think you're saying the right words, native speakers can barely understand you. This linguistic incompetence is actually helping your case. If you were a spy or a shapeshifter, you'd probably be better at learning the local language. Your obvious struggle with Nahuatl is evidence that you might actually be what you appear to be, a confused person from somewhere very far away. Chapter 9. The Festival of Tenochtitlan. You've been in the palace for almost 2 weeks, when the preparations begin for something big. There's increased activity everywhere. Servants scurrying around with decorations, priests conducting elaborate ceremonies, craftsmen working on what look like parade floats, and a general air of excitement that suggests a major celebration is coming. This is the Festival of Tenochtitlan, one of the most important religious celebrations in the Aztec calendar. It's dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god of night, conflict, and change. It's also one of the bloodiest festivals of the year. The centerpiece of Tenochtitlan is a ritual that perfectly encapsulates the Aztec approach to religion, sacrifice, and the relationship between humans and gods. They select a young man who is considered physically perfect, handsome, athletic, intelligent, and charismatic. For an entire year before the festival, this person lives as the earthly embodiment of Tezcatlipoca himself. He's given the finest clothes, the best food, beautiful women as companions, servants to attend his every need, and is treated with the reverence due to a living god. He learns to play the flute, to dance, to speak eloquently, and to carry himself with divine dignity. For 365 days, he lives better than royalty. Then, on the day of Tenochtitlan, he climbs the steps of the main temple and sacrifices himself to the gods, dying so that the world can continue to exist. From the Aztec perspective, this is the most honorable fate imaginable. This young man gets to live as a god for a year, then achieve immortality by ensuring the survival of the universe. It's a privilege that people compete for. From your perspective, it's absolutely horrifying. But here's what's really unsettling. As you watch the preparations, you start to understand that this isn't considered a tragedy by anyone involved. The young man who will die, and you see him around the palace, practicing his flute, laughing with his companions, being treated with incredible reverence, seems genuinely happy about his fate. He's not being forced into this. He's not drugged or coerced or mentally impaired. He believes, completely and sincerely, that what he's going to do is not only necessary, but glorious. He's going to save the world by dying, and he considers himself lucky to have the opportunity. This challenges everything you think you know about human nature, coercion, and rational behavior. How can someone be genuinely happy about their own impending ritual death? How can an entire civilization build their most important religious celebration around human sacrifice and consider it not only normal, but beautiful? You're getting an up-close look at how completely different worldviews can produce completely different definitions of meaning, honor, and appropriate behavior. And it's making you question assumptions about human nature that you didn't even realize you had. The festival itself is incredible. The entire city participates. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, dancing, singing, playing music, wearing costumes that turn the whole place into a massive theatrical performance. There are processions with floats so elaborate they look like moving temples, performers doing acrobatics that would impress modern circus audiences, and food vendors selling treats that exist only during the celebration. Everyone is happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Children are laughing, adults are celebrating, elderly people are smiling and sharing stories. This is a community celebration on a scale that makes modern festivals look like backyard barbecues. And at the center of it all is the knowledge that someone is going to die today to make all of this possible. You watch from a palace balcony as the procession makes its way to the main temple. The young man who embodies Tezcatlipoca is at the center, playing his flute, surrounded by priests and nobles and thousands of celebrants. He's not being dragged to his death. He's leading the parade. When they reach the temple, the crowd falls silent. The young man climbs the steps alone, still playing his flute. At each level, he breaks one of his flutes and leaves it behind, symbolically shedding his earthly life as he ascends to join the gods. At the top, the priests are waiting. You don't watch the actual sacrifice. You can't. But you hear the crowd's response. Not horror or grief, but a roar of celebration and religious ecstasy. They believe they've just witnessed the most sacred act possible, performed by someone who chose divine immortality over earthly life. And then the festival continues. Music, dancing, feasting, celebration. The death that just occurred isn't a tragedy to be mourned. It's a victory to be celebrated. You're beginning to understand that you're not just in a different place, you're in a completely different universe of meaning and value. Everything you think you know about right and wrong, normal and abnormal, acceptable and unacceptable, is being challenged by people who are clearly intelligent, sophisticated, and genuinely happy, but who live according to principles that are completely alien to your modern worldview. Chapter 10. The Dark Arts of Aztec Medicine. 2 days after Toxcatl, you wake up feeling terrible. Your stomach is cramping, you have a fever, you're nauseous, and you're experiencing what can diplomatically be described as severe digestive distress. Congratulations. You've succumbed to one of the countless diseases that your modern immune system has no defense against. This could be anything from contaminated water to unfamiliar bacteria to parasites to food poisoning from some exotic ingredient your digestive system can't process. Whatever it is, you're genuinely sick, and in a time and place where medical knowledge is very different from what you're used to. The palace physicians are called to examine you. These are people who have spent years studying the human body, disease, and treatment methods. They're not primitive witch doctors. They're medical professionals with detailed knowledge of anatomy, pharmacology, and therapeutic techniques. But their approach to medicine is different. The head physician examines you thoroughly. He looks at your eyes, your tongue, your skin color, feels your pulse, examines your urine, and even smells your breath. This is all perfectly reasonable medical practice that wouldn't be out of place in a modern doctor's office. Then he starts asking about your spiritual condition. Have you offended any gods recently? Have you been exposed to sorcery? Are you being punished for moral transgressions? Have you been cursed by enemies? From the Aztec medical perspective, physical illness often has supernatural causes. Diseases can be sent by gods, caused by sorcerers, or result from spiritual imbalance. Effective treatment requires addressing not just the physical symptoms, but also the underlying spiritual problems. The physician prescribes a combination of herbal medicines and religious rituals. Some of the herbs are genuinely effective. The Aztecs had discovered medical plants that modern pharmacology has validated as genuinely therapeutic. Willow bark for pain relief, various plants for digestive issues, natural antibiotics, and effective treatments for many common ailments. But he also prescribes confession to cleanse your spiritual impurities, ritual baths with water blessed by priests, and offerings to the gods who might be causing your illness. The herbal medicines taste terrible, but actually seem to help. Whatever he's giving you for your digestive problems is working, and the pain-relieving plants are genuinely effective. Aztec medicine had identified dozens of therapeutic compounds that modern medicine still uses, but the spiritual treatments are harder to navigate. The physician wants you to confess your sins to a priest so that the gods will stop punishing you with illness. The problem is that the concept of sin in Aztec religion doesn't match what you think of as sinful behavior. Aztec moral philosophy emphasized balance, moderation, and social responsibility. Sexual excess was considered sinful, but so was sexual abstinence if you were married. Drunkenness was sinful, but refusing to drink ceremonial alcohol was also problematic. Pride was a sin, but so was false humility. The priest who comes to hear your confession is trying to determine what moral imbalance might have caused your illness. Since you can't communicate effectively, he has to guess based on your appearance and behavior. He decides that your illness is probably caused by spiritual contamination from whatever strange land you come from, combined with the shock of being exposed to proper Aztec religious practices after a lifetime of ignorance. His recommended treatment involves purification rituals designed to cleanse you of foreign spiritual influences and prepare you for proper integration into Aztec religious life. This involves several hours of chanting, being washed with special water, having various herbs burned around you while you breathe the smoke, and drinking liquids that taste like they were designed to punish you for being sick. But here's the weird part. It actually helps. Whether it's the herbs, the ritualistic structure that provides psychological comfort, or just the passage of time allowing your body to recover, you start feeling better. The improvement convinces the physician that his diagnosis was correct. Your illness was caused by spiritual contamination, and the religious treatments addressed the root cause. From his perspective, this is perfectly logical medical reasoning. From your perspective, you've just been successfully treated by a medical system that combines genuinely effective pharmacology with religious practices that seem completely unrelated to your actual illness. This is making you question some fundamental assumptions about how healing works, what medicine is, and how much of recovery is physical versus psychological. The Aztec approach to medicine treats the whole person, body, mind, and spirit, rather than just targeting specific symptoms. And it worked. You feel better, and you're starting to develop a grudging respect for medical practitioners who take spiritual health as seriously as physical health. Chapter 11. Education of a Time Traveler. During your recovery, one of the palace scholars has taken a particular interest in you. His name is Tlacaelel, and he's what the Aztecs call a tlacuilo, a scribe and keeper of knowledge. He's responsible for maintaining historical records, astronomical observations, and maps of the known world. Tlacaelel has decided that you're going to be his project. He's going to teach you enough about Aztec civilization that you can function as something other than a complete barbarian. This education is as much for his benefit as yours. You're a unique opportunity to study how someone from outside Mesoamerica responds to Aztec culture, and he's documenting everything for future scholars. Your education begins with basic concepts of time and space. The Aztec calendar is incredibly sophisticated, actually more accurate than the European calendar being used in 1519. It's based on detailed astronomical observations and mathematical calculations that demonstrate a level of scientific knowledge that would impress modern astronomers. Tlacaelel shows you carved stone calendars that are works of art and scientific instruments at the same time. The famous Aztec calendar stone that ends up in museums isn't just decorative. It's a complex device for tracking multiple calendar systems simultaneously, predicting eclipses, and understanding the relationship between human time and cosmic time. He tries to explain how the Aztec calendar works. There are two main calendar systems that run simultaneously. The Tonopouhualli is a 260-day sacred calendar used for religious ceremonies and divination. The Xiuhpohualli is a 365-day solar calendar used for agriculture and civil purposes. Every 52 years, these calendars sync up in a cycle called Xiuhmilpilli, which is celebrated with massive ceremonies and the renewal of all sacred fires. This is more mathematically complex than anything Europe had developed, and it works perfectly for tracking both religious obligations and agricultural cycles. Your lessons in astronomy are equally impressive. Tlacaelel shows you codices, books made from bark paper and deer hide, that contain detailed observations of planetary movements, star patterns, and eclipse cycles. The Aztecs could predict solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and they used this knowledge for both practical and religious purposes. They knew that Venus was both the morning and evening star. They tracked the movements of Mars and Jupiter, and they had identified constellations that don't appear in European astronomical traditions. Their knowledge of the night sky was superior to European astronomy in many ways. But here's where it gets weird for you. All of this scientific knowledge is integrated with religious and mythological interpretations that seem completely unscientific. The same people who can calculate the exact date of future eclipses also believe that eclipses are caused by cosmic jaguars trying to devour the sun. Tlacaelel explains that scientific observation and religious interpretation aren't contradictory. They're different ways of understanding the same phenomena. Knowing that an eclipse will occur on a specific date because of planetary mechanics doesn't make it less religiously significant. The gods work through natural laws, not in spite of them. This integration of scientific observation with spiritual interpretation is completely foreign to your modern mind, which tends to separate rational scientific knowledge from irrational religious beliefs. The Aztecs don't make this distinction. All knowledge is sacred knowledge, and understanding the natural world is a form of religious practice. Your mathematical education is particularly challenging. The Aztecs use a base 20 number system, rather than the base 10 system you're used to. Their mathematical concepts are sophisticated. They understand zero, they can perform complex calculations, and they use mathematics for engineering projects that would challenge modern architects. But learning to think in base 20 when you've spent your entire life thinking in base 10 is like learning to walk backwards while juggling. It's theoretically possible, but it requires rewiring fundamental cognitive patterns. Tlacaelel is patient with your mathematical incompetence, but clearly frustrated. From his perspective, mathematics is the language of the gods, and your inability to understand basic mathematical concepts suggests either profound intellectual limitations or serious spiritual problems. Your lessons in history are the most fascinating part of your education. Tlacaelel shows you codices that record Aztec history going back centuries, but these aren't history books in the way you understand them. They're combinations of historical fact, religious interpretation, and moral instruction. The story of Aztec migration from the legendary homeland of Aztlan is told through pictures and symbols that combine factual information about roots and dates with mythological interpretations about divine guidance and cosmic significance. The founding of Tenochtitlan is presented as both a practical decision about where to build a city and the fulfillment of religious prophecy. What you're seeing is how a sophisticated civilization understands its own past, not as a series of random events, but as a meaningful narrative in which human actions, divine will, and natural forces all work together to create the present world. This historical consciousness is completely integrated with their understanding of the future. Just as the past shows patterns of divine action and cosmic cycles, the future will follow similar patterns. Current events aren't random. They're part of ongoing cycles that can be predicted and influenced through proper religious and political action. By this point in your education, you're starting to understand that Aztec civilization isn't just different from modern culture. It operates according to completely different assumptions about how reality works. They don't separate science from religion, individual welfare from cosmic balance, or human history from divine action. Everything is connected to everything else in a comprehensive worldview that's internally consistent and remarkably sophisticated, but completely alien to modern thinking. And you're beginning to realize that understanding this worldview might be the key to surviving in it. Chapter 12, The Art of War. Your education takes a darker turn when Tlacaelel decides you need to understand Aztec military culture. This isn't just academic knowledge. Understanding how the Aztec military works might be essential to your survival, especially if the empire faces external threats. The Aztec approach to warfare is unlike anything in your experience. Modern warfare is about destroying enemy forces as efficiently as possible, preferably from a distance, using superior technology and firepower. Aztec warfare is about capturing enemies alive for a religious sacrifice, demonstrating personal courage, and gaining social advancement through individual combat prowess. Tlacaelel shows you weapons that are works of art as much as tools of war. The Makuahuitl, the obsidian-edged club, is carved from hardwood and embedded with volcanic glass blades that are sharper than steel. A skilled warrior can decapitate a horse with one swing, but the weapon is designed for capturing rather than killing. The goal in Aztec combat is to wound or subdue your opponent so they can be taken alive for sacrifice. Killing enemies in battle is sometimes necessary, but it's not the preferred outcome. Dead enemies can't be offered to the gods, and capturing live enemies demonstrates greater skill than simply killing them. This creates a completely different dynamic in combat. Aztec warriors are trained to fight in ways that maximize their chances of capturing enemies rather than maximizing enemy casualties. They use weapons designed to disable rather than kill. They fight in formations that allow for the capture and removal of prisoners, and they develop combat skills focused on subduing opponents without killing them. For warriors, this system creates opportunities for social advancement that don't exist in most military cultures. Each captured enemy represents potential promotion, increased status, better equipment, and greater rewards. The most successful warriors can achieve noble status through military prowess, regardless of their birth circumstances. Tlacaelel explains the military hierarchy through illustrated codices that show warriors at different ranks. At the bottom are young men who haven't yet captured any enemies. They wear simple clothes, carry basic weapons, and are considered little better than civilians. Warriors who have captured one enemy can wear specific types of clothing and jewelry that indicate their achievement. Those who have captured multiple enemies gain access to better equipment, more elaborate costumes, and greater respect. The elite warrior societies, the Eagle Warriors and Jaguar Warriors, are reserved for those who have demonstrated exceptional combat skills by capturing many enemies. These are the special forces of the Aztec military, and they're also important religious figures because their combat success proves they're favored by the war gods. The weapons training you observe is unlike anything you've seen. Aztec warriors train not just with weapons, but with weapons designed to capture specific types of enemies. There are techniques for fighting against different ethnic groups, different types of armor, different combat styles. They also train for psychological warfare. Aztec armies include specialists whose job is to terrify enemies before battle even begins. They wear costumes designed to look supernatural. They make sounds intended to create panic, and they use tactics designed to convince enemies that they're facing divine rather than human opponents. The religious aspects of warfare are constant. Before battles, there are elaborate ceremonies to gain the favor of war gods. During battles, combat is considered a form of religious service. After battles, The captured enemies become part of religious ceremonies that ensure cosmic balance and divine favor for future military campaigns. What's most disturbing from your modern perspective is how integrated this military culture is with the rest of Aztec society. Warfare isn't something that happens far away, conducted by professional soldiers who are separate from civilian life. Military service is a normal part of male social development. Military success is one of the main paths to social advancement. And military values are woven into education, religion, and daily life. Every young man is expected to prove himself in combat. Every major religious ceremony includes military elements. Every important political decision has military implications. The entire civilization is organized around the assumption that warfare is not only inevitable, but necessary for maintaining cosmic balance. Tlacaelel tries to teach you basic combat skills, partly for your own protection, and partly to see how someone from outside Mesoamerica responds to Aztec military training. The lessons are humbling. You discover that you have no idea how to use any traditional weapons effectively. The maquahuitl is heavier than it looks, requires specific techniques to avoid cutting yourself with the obsidian blades, and demands a level of physical fitness and coordination that you simply don't have. The combat training also reveals how pathetically out of shape you are compared to people who have been physically active their entire lives. After 10 minutes of basic weapon drills, you're breathing hard, sweating profusely, and your muscles are already aching. The Aztec warriors who train alongside you aren't even warmed up yet. But the most challenging aspect of military training isn't physical, it's psychological. You're being asked to learn techniques for capturing human beings so they can be sacrificed to gods. Every combat skill you're taught is designed to facilitate human sacrifice. Every successful technique brings you closer to participating in a system that your modern moral framework considers absolutely unacceptable. Yet you're surrounded by people who consider this training not just normal, but noble. The warriors who are teaching you are proud of their skills, honored by their society, and genuinely believe that what they do is necessary for the survival of the universe. This is forcing you to confront uncomfortable questions about moral relativism, cultural context, and the nature of ethical behavior. Are these people evil because they participate in human sacrifice, or are they products of a different moral universe where different principles apply? The answer matters, because your survival might depend on your ability to function within their moral framework rather than judging it by your own standards. Chapter 13, The Floating Gardens. Your education continues with what might be the most impressive aspect of Aztec civilization, their agricultural system. Tlacaelel takes you on a tour of the Canampas, the floating gardens that feed the enormous population of Tenochtitlan. These aren't actually floating gardens, despite what Spanish conquistadors called them. They're artificial islands, created by piling mud and vegetation in the shallow areas of Lake Texcoco, creating incredibly fertile agricultural plots that can produce multiple crops per year. The engineering involved is staggering. Each chinampa is about 30 feet wide and up to 300 feet long, separated by canals that provide transportation, irrigation, and drainage. The entire system covers thousands of acres and represents one of the most intensive agricultural systems ever developed. What you're seeing is sustainable urban agriculture that feeds a city of 300,000 people without depleting soil fertility, without requiring massive amounts of external inputs, and without creating environmental degradation. It's more ecologically sound than most modern agricultural systems. The crops grown on the Chinampas include varieties that won't be known to the rest of the world for decades or centuries. There are dozens of types of corn, each adapted to specific growing conditions and culinary uses. There are beans that fix nitrogen in the soil, squash that provides both food and useful materials, and flowers that are both beautiful and edible. But it's not just the diversity of crops that's impressive, it's the intensity of cultivation. The Chinampas produce year-round, with multiple crops planted simultaneously in complex patterns that maximize yield while maintaining soil health. The farmers who work these plots have knowledge of plant biology, soil management, and ecological relationships that would impress modern agricultural scientists. The transportation system that moves food from the Chinampas to the city is equally sophisticated. Thousands of canoes navigate the canal system daily, carrying fresh produce to markets throughout Tenochtitlan. It's a distribution network that ensures fresh food is available citywide without the need for long-term storage or preservation. Tlacaelel explains that the Chinampa system is also a form of environmental engineering that solves multiple problems simultaneously. The artificial islands provide agricultural land in an area where suitable farmland is scarce. The canal system provides transportation routes that are more efficient than roads for moving heavy loads. The wetland environment supports fish and waterfowl that provide additional protein sources. But most importantly, the entire system is integrated with the religious and social structure of Aztec civilization. The agricultural calendar is coordinated with religious ceremonies that ensure divine favor for crops. The distribution of Chinampa plots follows social hierarchies that reinforce political relationships. The knowledge required to manage the system is passed down through family and guild structures that maintain both technical expertise and social stability. You're getting a practical lesson in how a sophisticated civilization organizes itself to solve complex problems. The Kanapas aren't just farms. They're an integrated system of environmental management, social organization, economic distribution, and religious practice. And it works. The evidence is everywhere around you. A massive city with a population that rivals modern metropolitan areas, sustained by agricultural techniques that are more environmentally sound than most modern farming methods. Chapter 14. The Schools of Hard Knocks. Your education takes another turn when Tlacaelel decides you need to understand how Aztec children are raised and educated. This isn't just academic curiosity. Understanding how people learn to function in this society might help you figure out how to survive in it. The Aztec approach to child rearing and education is intense by modern standards. Children are expected to contribute to household labor from an early age, to master complex social skills by adolescence, and to be fully functional adults capable of supporting themselves and serving their community by their late teens. There are two main types of schools in Aztec society, and which one you attend depends on your social class and intended role in life. The Telpachcali, or House of Youth, is where most children go to learn basic skills. These are neighborhood schools that teach practical knowledge. How to farm, how to make crafts, basic military training for boys, household management for girls, and the fundamental religious and social knowledge that everyone needs to function in Aztec society. The Comicac is the elite school system, reserved for children of nobles and exceptionally talented commoners who show potential for leadership roles. The education at Comicac is much more intensive, covering advanced subjects like astronomy, mathematics, history, law, theology, and the complex arts of government and military command. But both types of schools emphasize discipline, respect for authority, and the subordination of individual desires to community needs in ways that would seem harsh by modern standards. Tlacaelel shows you codices that illustrate typical punishments for students who misbehave or fail to meet educational standards. These include physical punishments that would be considered child abuse in modern society, piercing with agave thorns, exposure to chilly smoke, forced labor, and various forms of public humiliation. From the Aztec perspective, this harsh discipline is necessary to prepare young people for adult responsibilities that require absolute reliability, unquestioning obedience to authority, and the ability to endure physical and psychological stress without breaking down. From your modern perspective, it looks like systematic child abuse designed to create compliant, trauma-bonded adults who won't question authority. But here's what complicates your moral judgment. The system produces adults who are remarkably competent, psychologically stable, and capable of extraordinary achievements. The people around you are products of this educational system, and they've created one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. This challenges modern assumptions about child psychology, educational methods, and the relationship between individual freedom and social functionality. Maybe harsh discipline really does produce stronger, more capable adults. Maybe protecting children from stress and failure actually weakens them. Maybe modern educational approaches that prioritize self-esteem and individual expression produce adults who are less capable of handling real-world challenges. Or maybe the Aztec system works only within Aztec cultural contexts, and the same methods would be destructive in different social environments. The religious education that's part of all Aztec schooling is particularly intense. Children learn not just religious stories and ceremonies, but the underlying theological principles that govern all aspects of life. They memorize complex mythological narratives, master the mathematical principles behind calendar systems, and develop the ability to interpret signs and omens that might affect their community. This religious education isn't separate from practical training. It's integrated with everything else. Learning to farm includes understanding the religious ceremonies that ensure good harvests. Military training includes the religious significance of warfare and sacrifice. Craft instruction includes the spiritual aspects of creating objects that will be used in religious contexts. By adolescence, Aztec students have internalized a comprehensive worldview that integrates practical skills, social responsibilities, religious obligations, and intellectual knowledge into a coherent framework for understanding reality. They also have levels of physical fitness, pain tolerance, and psychological resilience that most modern adults never develop. They can perform physically demanding labor for hours without complaint, endure discomfort without breaking down, and function effectively under stress that would incapacitate people raised in more comfortable circumstances. The educational system produces adults who are prepared for the demands of Aztec life, but who would probably be considered psychologically damaged by modern standards. They're compliant with authority, accepting of hierarchy, comfortable with violence, and capable of participating in practices like human sacrifice without apparent psychological trauma. Understanding this educational background helps explain why your own behavior seems so strange and unacceptable to the people around you. You lack the basic social skills, physical capabilities, psychological resilience, and religious knowledge that every Aztec adult is expected to possess. From their perspective, you're not just foreign, you're fundamentally unprepared for adult life in any civilized society. Chapter 15, Divine Economics. One of the most confusing aspects of life in Tenochtitlan is the economic system, which operates according to principles that don't match anything in your modern experience. Tlacaelel tries to explain how trade, wealth, and economic relationships work in the Aztec Empire, but the concepts are so different from modern economics that you struggle to understand them. The Aztecs don't use money in the way you understand it. Instead, they have a complex system of trade goods that serve as units of exchange for different types of transactions. Cacao beans are used for small purchases, cotton cloaks for medium transactions, and quills filled with gold dust for large exchanges. But these aren't just neutral mediums of exchange, they're goods with intrinsic value that are also used as currency. The cacao beans that serve as small change can also be ground up and made into chocolate. The cotton cloaks that serve as larger denomination currency are also clothing that people actually wear. This integration of currency with useful goods creates an economic system where money can't become completely detached from real value the way modern fiat currency can. You can't have inflation caused by printing more money, because making more currency means making more useful goods. The market system is incredibly sophisticated, despite, or perhaps because of, the absence of traditional money. The Great Market of Tlatelolco operates as a central exchange, where goods from throughout Mesoamerica are bought, sold, and traded according to established exchange rates that reflect both supply and demand and traditional relationships between different types of goods. But the market isn't just an economic institution, it's also a social and religious one. Market days are community celebrations, business relationships are personal relationships, and commercial success is considered evidence of divine favor. The concept of wealth in Aztec society is also different from modern ideas. Wealthy individuals are expected to demonstrate their success through conspicuous consumption that benefits their entire community. Rich merchants sponsor religious festivals, nobles provide feasts for their neighbors, and successful warriors share their spoils with their families and followers. Hoarding wealth for its own sake is considered not just antisocial but spiritually dangerous. The gods provide abundance to be shared, not to be accumulated by individuals. Extreme wealth inequality exists, but it's mitigated by cultural expectations that successful people will use their resources for community benefit. The tribute system that holds the empire together is also economically sophisticated. Conquered territories provide specific goods to the imperial capital according to their natural resources and manufacturing capabilities. Coastal areas provide shells and fish. Mountain regions provide precious stones and metals. Agricultural areas provide food crops, and craft centers provide manufactured goods. This creates a trade network that efficiently distributes resources throughout the empire while providing economic incentives for regional specialization. Different areas develop expertise in producing specific goods for the imperial market, creating economic relationships that make political unity profitable for everyone involved. But the tribute system isn't just economic, it's also religious and political. Providing tribute to Tenochtitlan demonstrates political submission, ensures divine protection, and maintains the cosmic balance that keeps the world functioning properly. Your attempts to understand this economic system are complicated by your complete lack of any goods to trade. You have nothing of value to offer in exchange for the food, clothing, and shelter you're receiving. In a society where all relationships are expected to be reciprocal, your inability to contribute anything makes you a social anomaly. The palace staff who care for you are doing so on orders from higher authority. But this creates an awkward situation where you're consuming resources without providing anything in return. This would be acceptable if you were a child, a sick person, or someone temporarily unable to contribute, but you're clearly an adult who should be capable of productive work. Your ignorance of basic economic relationships makes you appear either mentally deficient or deliberately parasitic. Neither interpretation helps your social status. Tlacaelel tries to address this by finding ways for you to contribute to the intellectual work of the palace. You can help with copying codices, organizing materials, and assisting with the kinds of scholarly work that don't require advanced knowledge of Aztec culture. This gives you some economic value and helps legitimize your presence in the palace, but it also makes clear how economically marginal you are. Your contributions are minimal compared to what you consume, and everyone involved knows it. In a society where economic relationships are also social and religious relationships, your economic marginality affects your social status and spiritual standing. You're not just poor, you're outside the reciprocal network of obligations that defines civilized human relationships. Chapter 16, The Long Night of the Soul. 3 weeks into your stay in the palace, something happens that changes everything. You wake up in the middle of the night to sounds of commotion in the corridors, running footsteps, urgent voices, doors opening and closing. Something is wrong. Very wrong. The guards who are always present outside your room are gone. The servants who usually bring your evening meal haven't appeared. The palace, which is normally bustling with activity, has become eerily quiet, except for occasional distant sounds of what might be fighting. You have no idea what's happening, but your modern brain immediately starts imagining the worst possibilities: invasion, rebellion, natural disaster, plague, any of which could result in your death if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. After what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes, Tlacaelel appears in your doorway. His usually calm demeanor is replaced by obvious stress, and he's carrying a travel pack and what looks like important documents. He speaks to you urgently in Nahuatl, and while your language skills are still limited, you understand enough to gather that you need to leave the palace immediately. There's danger, people are coming, and staying here is not safe. You're being evacuated, but you don't know why or to where. The journey through the palace is surreal. Corridors that were beautifully lit and bustling with activity are now dark and empty. Some areas show signs of hasty departure: abandoned meals, scattered papers, open doors revealing rooms that were obviously vacated quickly. Other areas show signs of something more disturbing. There are dark stains on some walls that look like blood, broken pottery and furniture that suggests struggles, and in one courtyard, bodies of palace guards that have been hastily covered with cloaks. Something violent has happened here, and it might still be happening. Tlacaelel leads you through passages you've never seen before, service corridors and hidden routes that allow movement through the palace without using the main halls. These are clearly designed for exactly this kind of emergency evacuation. You emerge from the palace complex through a small door that opens onto one of the canals. There's a canoe waiting with paddlers who look like warriors rather than normal boatmen. Everything about this situation suggests that whatever is happening is serious enough to require military-level security measures. The canoe ride through the city at night reveals a Tenochtitlan you've never seen before. Instead of the bustling, cheerful activity you've become accustomed to, the streets are empty, windows are shuttered, and there are no lights except for torches carried by groups of armed men who seem to be patrolling rather than celebrating. The city is under some kind of martial law or emergency conditions. Tlacaelel tries to explain what's happening, but your limited Nahuatl and his obvious stress make communication difficult. You catch fragments, tools, gods or strangers, Tlatoli, word or news, Mikistli, death, and Yaoyotl, war. Strangers have brought word of war and death. This doesn't sound good. Your destination turns out to be a building in a different part of the city, smaller than the palace, less elaborate, but clearly important. There are guards, other people who look like refugees or evacuees, and an atmosphere of controlled crisis. Inside, you discover that you're not the only unusual person who has been moved here for safety. There are other individuals who don't fit normal Aztec social categories: foreign traders, people from distant regions, individuals whose status is unclear or problematic. You're in a safe house for people who don't fit into normal Aztec society and who might be at risk during whatever crisis is currently unfolding. Over the next few hours, as other evacuees arrive and information becomes clearer, you begin to understand what has happened. Scouts and traders returning from the eastern coast have brought news of something unprecedented. Strange beings with pale skin, hair covering their faces, and weapons that make sounds like thunder have arrived from across the eastern sea. They travel in floating houses larger than any buildings. They ride on the backs of large animals that no one has ever seen before, and they possess weapons that can kill from great distances with invisible force. Some people think these beings are gods. Others think they're demons. Everyone agrees they represent something completely outside normal human experience, and they're coming toward Tenochtitlan. The news has caused panic in the palace and throughout the city. If these beings are gods, proper preparations must be made to receive them appropriately. If they're demons or enemies, defenses must be organized. If they're something else entirely, no one knows what the appropriate response should be. Moctezuma has ordered that all unusual or potentially supernatural individuals in the city be moved to secure locations until the situation becomes clearer. Your presence in Tenochtitlan, which was already puzzling, has become potentially significant in ways no one understands. If the pale strangers are connected to whatever force brought you here, you might be valuable as a source of information or as a diplomatic asset. If they're hostile and you're connected to them, you might be a security risk. If they're divine and your arrival was a prophetic sign, your treatment could affect the gods' attitude toward the Aztec Empire. No one knows, but everyone agrees that your status has just changed from interesting curiosity to potentially crucial strategic asset or threat. Welcome to the most dangerous period in Aztec history. Your timing really couldn't be worse. Chapter 17, The Storm. Before the storm, the safe house becomes your window into the growing crisis gripping Tenochtitlan. Over the following days, more refugees arrive with increasingly disturbing news from the coast. The pale strangers, who will eventually be known as Spanish conquistadors, are not behaving like any gods in Aztec mythology. They're demanding tribute, destroying religious images, capturing local leaders, and generally acting more like invading enemies than divine visitors. But their weapons and animals are so far beyond Aztec experience that even treating them as human enemies doesn't provide clear guidance for how to respond. The debates among the Aztec leadership, as relayed by new arrivals at the safe house, reveal the impossible position the empire finds itself in. If these strangers are gods, fighting them would be not just futile but sacrilegious. If they're human enemies, their superior weapons make conventional military resistance extremely dangerous. If they're something else entirely, no one knows what strategies might be effective. Moctezuma's indecision becomes a topic of constant discussion among the refugees. Some praise his caution in the face of an unprecedented situation. Others criticize his failure to take decisive action against what they see as obvious threats to the empire. What everyone agrees on is that the arrival of the pale strangers represents a fundamental challenge to the Aztec understanding of reality. Their worldview, which has successfully guided the empire for centuries, doesn't provide clear answers for dealing with beings who don't fit any known categories. Your fellow refugees include people whose unique perspectives might provide insights into the crisis. There are traders who have traveled to distant lands, priests who specialize in interpreting omens and prophecies, and warriors who have experience fighting unusual enemies. But none of them have ever encountered anything like the Spanish conquistadors, and their attempts to understand the situation by reference to familiar categories aren't producing useful results. The trader who has traveled farthest north talks about encountering people with different customs and weapons, but nothing like the firearms and horses that the Spanish possess. The priests analyze the timing of the Spanish arrival in terms of calendar cycles and religious prophecies, but the interpretations are contradictory and don't provide clear guidance for action. The warriors discuss military tactics for fighting against superior weapons, but they're thinking in terms of traditional warfare, where the goal is to capture enemies alive for sacrifice, not the European approach of simply killing as many opponents as possible. Everyone is trying to fit an unprecedented situation into familiar frameworks, and the frameworks aren't adequate for the challenge. Meanwhile, normal life in Tenochtitlan is beginning to break down. The uncertainty about how to respond to the Spanish threat is paralyzing normal decision-making processes. Trade relationships are disrupted because no one knows whether traditional agreements will still be valid in whatever new world is coming. Religious ceremonies are modified because priests aren't sure whether traditional rituals are still appropriate. Military preparations are hampered because commanders can't agree on what they're preparing for. The social cohesion that has held the empire together is beginning to fracture under the stress of the unprecedented challenge. Your own situation becomes increasingly surreal as the crisis deepens. The questions about your origins and nature, which seemed like abstract intellectual puzzles a few weeks ago, have become urgent practical concerns. If you're connected to the pale strangers, your knowledge might be crucial for understanding their intentions and capabilities. But you can't explain to anyone that you're from the 21st century, that the pale strangers are Spanish conquistadors led by Hernan Cortez, that they're going to destroy the Aztec Empire within 2 years, and that everything the Aztec people are worried about is going to be much worse than they can imagine. Your knowledge of what's coming makes you the only person in the entire empire who understands the true scope of the crisis, but your inability to communicate that knowledge effectively makes you powerless to help prevent the catastrophe. It's like being a time traveler who arrives just in time to watch one of history's greatest civilizations destroy itself through misunderstanding and misplaced trust, knowing exactly what's going to happen, but being unable to change any of it. The psychological stress of this situation is beginning to affect you in ways you didn't anticipate. You're experiencing something like survivor's guilt for a disaster that hasn't happened yet, combined with the frustration of being unable to warn people about dangers you know are coming. You also find yourself questioning whether you should even try to change historical events, if you could. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire is one of the most significant events in human history, with consequences that shaped the modern world. Do you have the right to interfere with that process, even to prevent enormous suffering? These philosophical questions about time travel ethics don't have clear answers, and the practical reality is that your ability to influence events is extremely limited anyway. But the moral weight of your knowledge is becoming harder to bear as you watch intelligent, capable, fundamentally decent people struggle to understand a threat that you know is going to destroy their entire civilization. Chapter 18, When Worlds Collide. The crisis reaches a new level when messengers arrive with news that the pale strangers have been joined by thousands of indigenous allies, enemies of the Aztec Empire who see the Spanish as an opportunity to overthrow Aztec dominance. This development changes everything. What might have been manageable as an encounter with a small group of unusual beings has become a major military threat involving coordinated action by traditional enemies of the empire. The political implications are staggering. The Spanish have demonstrated an understanding of Mesoamerican politics sophisticated enough to identify and recruit the most effective local allies. They're not just strange beings with superior weapons. They're intelligent enemies who understand how to exploit the empire's vulnerabilities. The military implications are even worse. Fighting against Spanish weapons and tactics would be difficult enough. Fighting against Spanish weapons and tactics employed by armies of indigenous warriors who understand local terrain, supply chains, and Aztec military methods is approaching impossible. The psychological implications might be the worst of all. The Aztec Empire's legitimacy was based partly on military dominance that proved the gods favored Aztec rule. If traditional enemies can successfully challenge that dominance with the help of foreign allies, the entire ideological foundation of the empire is threatened. The debates at the Safe House become more intense as the full scope of the crisis becomes clear. Some people advocate for immediate military action to crush the Spanish indigenous alliance before it can become stronger. Others argue for diplomatic approaches that might separate the Spanish from their indigenous allies. Still, others suggest that the empire should accept whatever the pale strangers demand, on the theory that beings with such superior weapons must represent divine will that shouldn't be resisted. All of these approaches have serious problems. Military action risks devastating defeat against superior weapons. Diplomatic approaches assume the Spanish are interested in negotiation rather than conquest. Submission assumes the Spanish want to rule the existing empire rather than replace it entirely. What no one suggests is the approach that might actually work. Immediate, total, coordinated resistance by all Mesoamerican peoples against the Spanish threat, combined with diplomatic efforts to prevent Spanish reinforcement from Europe. But such an approach would require the Aztec Empire to give up its dominance over other indigenous groups, share military technology and tactics with traditional enemies, and coordinate strategy with peoples who have every reason to hate Aztec rule. From the Aztec perspective, this would mean destroying their own empire to save it from foreign conquest, a paradox that no one in the leadership seems willing to consider. Your knowledge of what's coming makes these debates particularly painful to witness. You know that none of the approaches being discussed will work. The Spanish are going to succeed in conquering the Aztec Empire regardless of what strategies the Aztecs adopt, because the fundamental asymmetries in technology, disease resistance, and political organization are too great to overcome through tactical adjustments. But you also know that the conquest won't be as quick or easy as Spanish accounts make it seem. It will take 2 years of brutal warfare, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and succeed partly through luck and partly through Aztec political and strategic mistakes that could have been avoided. The tragedy isn't just that the Aztec Empire is going to fall, it's that it's going to fall in ways that maximize suffering and destruction while minimizing the chances for cultural survival and adaptation. Watching this process unfold from your unique perspective of historical knowledge is like watching a slow-motion disaster where you can see exactly how each decision leads toward catastrophe, but you're powerless to change the trajectory. The Safe House receives another group of evacuees, including several priests who have been studying the Spanish threat from a religious perspective. Their analyses are sophisticated, but based on assumptions that don't account for European approaches to warfare, politics, and religion. They've concluded that the Spanish must be either gods or demons based on their unprecedented capabilities, but they're interpreting Spanish behavior through Mesoamerican religious frameworks that don't accurately predict European motivations and strategies. The Spanish aren't interested in the kinds of religious and political accommodations that would be normal in Mesoamerican conflicts between different groups. They want complete replacement of indigenous religious and political systems with European alternatives. But the Aztec priests can't imagine anyone wanting to completely destroy functional religious and political systems rather than simply modifying them to acknowledge new hierarchies and relationships. Their theological frameworks don't include concepts equivalent to European ideas about religious conversion, political colonization, and cultural replacement. This cognitive mismatch means that even the most intelligent and well-informed Aztec leaders are systematically misunderstanding Spanish intentions and capabilities in ways that make effective resistance much more difficult. Chapter 19. The Point of No Return. The final stage of your accidental historical experience begins when news arrives that the Spanish and their allies have won a major victory at Cholula, one of the most important cities allied with Tenochtitlan. The reports describe not just military defeat, but complete destruction. Temples burned, leaders killed, populations scattered or enslaved. This isn't the kind of warfare that Mesoamerican peoples practice against each other. This is something new and terrifying. Total war designed to completely eliminate enemy political and religious systems, rather than simply establishing new tribute relationships. The news from Cholula forces even the most optimistic Aztec leaders to acknowledge that they're facing an existential threat, rather than a manageable diplomatic challenge. The Spanish clearly aren't interested in becoming part of the existing Mesoamerican political system. They want to replace it entirely. Moctezuma's response to this crisis reveals the fundamental weakness of the Aztec political system when facing unprecedented challenges. The emperor's authority depends on his ability to maintain the cosmic balance that keeps the world functioning properly. But the Spanish threat is so far outside traditional categories that none of the usual responses seem appropriate. If Moctezuma responds with traditional military force and fails, he proves that the gods no longer support Aztec rule. If he responds with diplomatic accommodation and the Spanish prove treacherous, he proves that his wisdom is inadequate for protecting the empire. If he responds with religious submission and the Spanish prove to be demons rather than gods, he proves that his spiritual judgment is fatally flawed. Every possible response to the Spanish threat risks undermining the ideological foundations of his authority, which creates a paralyzing decision-making environment where doing nothing seems safer than doing anything. But doing nothing is also a decision, and it's the decision that will ultimately prove most catastrophic for the empire. The safe house receives word that Spanish and allied forces are approaching Tenochtitlan, and that Moctezuma has decided to receive them as honored guests rather than meet them as enemies. This decision represents either supreme wisdom or supreme folly, and nobody knows which until it's too late to change course. From your historical knowledge, you know this is the decision that dooms the empire. Allowing the Spanish into Tenochtitlan gives them the opportunity to seize Moctezuma, control the imperial government, and use Aztec political authority to legitimize their own rule. But from Moctezuma's perspective, this is the only decision that offers any hope of managing an impossible situation. Fighting the Spanish risks military defeat that would destroy the empire through warfare. Accommodating them offers the possibility of maintaining some form of Aztec authority under new arrangements. The tragedy is that both calculations are partially correct. Military resistance might well have failed, and accommodation might theoretically have preserved some aspects of Aztec civilization. But the specific form of accommodation that Moctezuma chooses, allowing the Spanish into the heart of the empire before determining their true intentions, eliminates any possibility of changing course if the accommodation fails. It's a strategic mistake of historical proportions, made by an intelligent leader facing an unprecedented situation with inadequate information and no good options. Your final days in the safe house are spent listening to increasingly desperate attempts to understand and respond to a crisis that's already beyond anyone's ability to control. The people around you are intelligent, experienced, and capable, but they're trying to solve problems that have no solutions within their cultural and technological frameworks. They're also fundamentally decent people who don't deserve the catastrophe that's about to befall them. The Aztec Empire has serious moral problems from modern perspectives: the human sacrifice, the authoritarian political system, the oppression of conquered peoples. But it also represents one of humanity's great civilizations, with achievements in art, science, engineering, and social organization that deserve respect and preservation. Watching that civilization prepare for its own destruction through a combination of external pressure and internal contradictions is like watching the Library of Alexandria burn while knowing that most of what's being lost will never be recovered. The personal relationships you've developed make the impending catastrophe even more painful. Tlacaelel, who has patiently educated you about Aztec culture, represents intellectual traditions that will be systematically destroyed by Spanish conquest. The priests, warriors, craftsmen, and ordinary people you've met represent human potential that will be wasted by the coming disaster. None of them deserve what's about to happen to them, but your knowledge of history tells you that deserve has nothing to do with it. Chapter 20. The Last Day of the World. Your final morning in Tenochtitlan arrives with news that Spanish forces have been sighted on the causeways approaching the city. This is it. The moment when two worlds meet and one of them begins to die. The city's response is unlike anything you've witnessed during your stay. There's no panic, no chaos, no desperate last-minute preparations for siege or battle. Instead, there's an eerie calm that comes from a collective decision to treat the approaching Spanish as honored guests rather than potential enemies. The preparations you observe are ceremonial rather than military. People are putting on their finest clothes, cleaning and decorating the streets, organizing welcoming committees, and preparing the kinds of elaborate receptions usually reserved for the most important religious festivals. From the perspective of Aztec culture, this makes perfect sense. If the Spanish are gods or divine messengers, receiving them properly is essential for maintaining cosmic balance. If they're powerful human allies, demonstrating respect and generosity might encourage favorable treatment for the empire. But from your historical knowledge, you know this ceremonial response is exactly wrong for dealing with Spanish conquistadors who are primarily interested in identifying wealth to steal and weaknesses to exploit. The contrast between Aztec and Spanish approaches to this first meeting represents the fundamental cultural misunderstanding that will doom the empire. The Aztecs are treating this as a religious and diplomatic encounter that should be managed through proper ceremony and reciprocal respect. The Spanish are treating it as a military and economic operation that should be managed through superior force and strategic advantage. Neither side understands what the other side actually wants or how they actually think, which makes meaningful communication almost impossible, even when both sides think they're being perfectly clear. Your evacuation from the safe house comes with instructions that you're being moved to an even more secure location outside the city until the situation with the Spanish becomes clearer. This is probably meant to protect you, but it also means you won't witness the actual first meeting between Moctezuma and Cortés, one of the most important moments in human history. The canoe ride out of Tenochtitlan gives you your final view of the city at the height of its power and beauty. The morning sun reflects off the lake, turning the water into a mirror that doubles the visual impact of the pyramids, palaces, and gardens. Thousands of people are moving through the streets in colorful clothing, creating a visual spectacle that rivals anything you've ever seen. It's absolutely magnificent, and you know you're probably among the last people who will ever see it like this. Within months, the city will be under Spanish control, its temples will be destroyed, its political system will be dismantled, and its population will be devastated by warfare and disease. The civilization that created this incredible urban achievement will be systematically eliminated and replaced by something fundamentally different. Most of what makes Tenochtitlan magnificent will be deliberately destroyed by people who see it as evidence of demonic influence rather than human achievement. Your final destination is a small compound in the mountains overlooking the Valley of Mexico, where you can see the entire lake system and the cities that dot its shores. From this distance, the approaching Spanish forces aren't visible, but you know they're there, moving toward their appointment with destiny. The compound is staffed by priests and scholars who have been evacuated from various temples and schools throughout the empire. These are the people responsible for preserving Aztec knowledge, and they're already beginning the process of hiding important codices and artifacts from whatever destruction might be coming. They don't know exactly what to expect from the Spanish, but they understand that foreign conquerors often destroy the intellectual achievements of the peoples they defeat. The precautions they're taking suggest that even the most optimistic Aztec leaders suspect that the coming encounter might not go well. From your mountain vantage point, you spend your final hours watching the last day of the Aztec Empire unfold in the valley below. Smoke rises from ceremonial fires throughout Tenochtitlan as priests perform rituals designed to ensure divine favor for the meetings with the Spanish. The canals are busy with boats carrying people toward the city center for the historic reception. Everything looks normal, even celebratory, from this distance. But you know that down in those streets, Hernán Cortés is meeting with Moctezuma, beginning the process that will lead to the fall of one of history's greatest civilizations. The scholars around you are debating what the Spanish arrival means for the future of Aztec knowledge and culture. Some are optimistic that powerful foreign allies might actually strengthen the empire and provide new opportunities for learning and growth. Others are preparing for the worst by creating hidden archives and training selected individuals to preserve essential knowledge, even if the formal educational system is destroyed. None of them can imagine the complete cultural replacement that the Spanish conquest will ultimately achieve. They're thinking in terms of political change and cultural adaptation, not total civilizational collapse and reconstruction according to completely foreign principles. Your knowledge of what's coming makes these conversations heartbreaking. You know that most of the codices they're trying to preserve will be burned by Spanish priests who consider them works of the devil. You know that the educational systems they're trying to protect will be dismantled and replaced with European schools that teach completely different subjects according to completely different methods. You know that the languages, religions, political systems, artistic traditions, and scientific knowledge that represent centuries of human achievement will be systematically eliminated in favor of European alternatives. But you also know that the destruction won't be complete. Some knowledge will survive, some traditions will adapt, some people will find ways to preserve aspects of their culture within the new colonial system. The Spanish conquest will be a catastrophe, but it won't be the end of indigenous civilization in Mesoamerica. That knowledge provides some comfort, but not much. The civilization you've experienced during your accidental time travel, the sophisticated urban culture, the integrated worldview, the remarkable achievements in art and science and social organization will be gone forever. As evening approaches, you realize that your strange journey is coming to an end. The same mysterious force that brought you to Tenochtitlan 3 weeks ago is beginning to pull you back to your own time. You can feel it, a growing sense of disconnection from the world around you, a fading of the vivid sensory experience that has made everything seem so real and immediate. The priests and scholars around you don't notice anything unusual. From their perspective, you've just been sitting quietly, contemplating the view of the valley. They have no idea that you're gradually slipping away from their reality and returning to a world that won't exist for another 500 years. Your final moments in the Aztec world are spent looking down at Tenochtitlan in the gathering darkness, watching the lights from thousands of torches and fires create a pattern of illumination that outlines the city's magnificent architecture. It's beautiful beyond description, and you're among the last people who will ever see it like this. Tomorrow, the Spanish will begin the process of dismantling this civilization. Within 2 years, the city will be in ruins, its population will be devastated, and its culture will be under systematic attack by people who see it as an obstacle to European colonization and Christian conversion. But for this one last moment, it's still magnificent, still functioning, still home to people who have created something remarkable and beautiful in the middle of a lake in the mountains of Mexico. And then you're gone. Epilogue. What we lost and what we learned. You wake up in your own bed, in your own time, with memories of 3 weeks in Tenochtitlan that feels simultaneously like a vivid dream and the most real experience of your life. Everything around you, your apartment, your possessions, your comfortable modern life, seems strange and artificial after experiencing a world where every object was made by hand, every relationship had cosmic significance, and every day brought you into direct contact with one of humanity's great civilizations. The contrast is jarring. You've just experienced a society where art, religion, politics, economics, and daily life were all integrated into a comprehensive worldview that gave meaning and significance to every human activity. Now you're back in a world where those elements of life are fragmented, where most people struggle to find coherence and meaning in their daily experiences. You've also experienced a society that was destroyed by people who couldn't or wouldn't recognize its achievements, and who replaced it with something that was more familiar to them, but objectively less sophisticated in many ways. The Spanish conquistadors who conquered the Aztec Empire were certainly brave and resourceful, but they weren't more intelligent, more capable, or more deserving of success than the people they defeated. They won because they had better weapons, resistance to diseases that devastated indigenous populations, and political advantages that had nothing to do with the moral or intellectual quality of their civilization. The destruction of the Aztec Empire wasn't a victory of good over evil or civilization over barbarism. It was a catastrophe that eliminated one of humanity's great achievements and replaced it with something simpler and less impressive. This historical perspective forces uncomfortable questions about progress, cultural superiority, and the relationship between technological advancement and human achievement. The Aztecs accomplished things that our modern civilization still struggles with: sustainable urban agriculture, integrated communities where individual welfare and social responsibility were balanced, educational systems that produced psychologically resilient and physically capable adults, and economic systems where wealth inequality was mitigated by cultural expectations about community responsibility. They did all of this without the technologies we consider essential for civilization: metal tools, wheeled vehicles, large domestic animals, written alphabets. Their achievements were based on human organization, knowledge, and skill rather than technological superiority. But they also practiced human sacrifice, maintained rigid social hierarchies, and conquered and oppressed neighboring peoples in ways that modern moral sensibilities find unacceptable. They weren't morally superior to modern civilization, just different in ways that made their particular achievements and failures different from our own. The real tragedy of the Spanish conquest wasn't just the destruction of Aztec civilization, but the lost opportunity for cultural exchange and synthesis that might have produced something better than either European or Aztec civilization alone. If the meeting between these two worlds had been based on mutual respect and genuine communication rather than conquest and replacement, both civilizations might have learned from each other in ways that advanced human knowledge and capability. Instead, we got conquest, cultural destruction, and the imposition of European systems on American foundations in ways that often fail to take advantage of indigenous achievements and innovations. Your accidental time travel experience also reveals how unprepared modern people are for the physical, psychological, and social challenges that were normal parts of daily life for most of human history. You barely survived 3 weeks in a society that was actually quite comfortable and secure by historical standards, and you would have been completely helpless if you'd been required to actually function as a productive member of that society. This raises questions about whether modern life, for all its technological advantages and material comforts, actually prepares people to be resilient, capable, and adaptable in the face of real challenges. The Aztec people you met were physically stronger, psychologically tougher, and more capable of handling stress and uncertainty than most modern adults. They achieved this not through superior genetics or harsh living conditions, but through educational and social systems that prepared people for the actual demands of adult life, rather than protecting them from difficulty and challenge. But they also lived shorter lives, had less individual freedom, and lacked access to the knowledge and opportunities that modern technology provides. The trade-offs between different approaches to human development don't have simple answers. Your experience also demonstrates how difficult it is to truly understand a different culture, even when you're immersed in it for weeks and receiving intensive education from experts. You barely began to grasp the complexity of Aztec civilization before your time there ended, and most of what you learned challenged assumptions you didn't even know you had. This suggests that much of what we think we know about other cultures, past and present, is probably superficial or distorted by our own cultural biases. True cross-cultural understanding requires not just learning facts about other societies, but questioning fundamental assumptions about human nature, social organization, and the relationship between individuals and communities. The Aztec approach to education, for example, produced adults who were more physically capable and psychologically resilient than modern educational systems typically achieve. But it did so through methods that modern people would consider abusive, and by sacrificing individual creativity and freedom in ways that modern values find unacceptable. Which approach is better depends on what you think human societies should optimize for: individual happiness, social stability, cultural achievement, economic productivity, military effectiveness, or some combination of different values. Your time in Tenochtitlan also revealed how much of what we consider natural or universal about human behavior is actually culturally determined. The Aztec people you met had completely different relationships to violence, authority, community responsibility, religious practice, and economic relationships than modern people do. But they weren't fundamentally different kinds of humans. They were the same species, with the same basic psychological and physical capabilities, raised in a different cultural environment that shaped their behaviors and values in different ways. This suggests that many of the problems modern societies struggle with, alienation, mental illness, social fragmentation, environmental destruction, aren't inevitable consequences of human nature, but results of specific cultural choices that could theoretically be changed. The Aztecs solved some problems that we haven't figured out how to solve, but they created other problems that we've managed to avoid. There's no perfect human society, but there are different ways of organizing human communities that produce different benefits and costs. Finally, your experience highlights the tragedy of historical ignorance and cultural prejudice. Most modern people know almost nothing about Aztec civilization except for human sacrifice and the Spanish conquest. They don't know about the remarkable achievements in urban planning, agriculture, art, science, and social organization that made Tenochtitlan one of the world's great cities. This ignorance isn't accidental. It's the result of centuries of European and American education that emphasized the achievements of European civilization, while minimizing or distorting the achievements of indigenous American civilizations. The result is that we've lost access to knowledge and approaches to human problems that might be useful for addressing modern challenges. We've also lost historical perspective that might help us understand our own civilization's strengths and weaknesses more clearly. Your accidental journey to Tenochtitlan was a reminder that human beings are capable of remarkable achievements under many different circumstances, using many different approaches to organizing society and solving problems. The particular path that led to modern civilization wasn't the only possible path, and it wasn't necessarily the best path for every human need and aspiration. Understanding this doesn't mean romanticizing the past or rejecting the benefits of modern life. It means developing a more humble and realistic perspective on human possibilities and a more nuanced understanding of how different societies balance competing values and priorities. The Aztec Empire fell because it couldn't adapt quickly enough to unprecedented challenges from a completely alien civilization. Modern civilization faces its own unprecedented challenges: environmental destruction, technological disruption, social fragmentation, economic inequality, that require adaptation and innovation on a scale that matches what the Aztecs attempted in their final years. Whether modern civilization will be more successful at managing existential challenges than the Aztecs were remains to be seen, but understanding how and why previous civilizations succeeded and failed might provide insights that improve our chances of creating sustainable, humane, and fulfilling ways of organizing human communities. Your brief experience as an accidental time traveler to the Aztec Empire was a reminder that human history is full of remarkable achievements that deserve respect and study, even when, or especially when, they were created by people whose values and methods were very different from our own. The question isn't whether you would have survived a day in Tenochtitlan. The question is what we can learn from a civilization that created something magnificent and then lost it, and how we can use that knowledge to create something even better in our own time. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of history's most fascinating and tragic civilizations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Aztec culture and society, let me know in the comments what other historical civilizations you'd like to explore. Hit that like button if this changed your perspective on the past, and subscribe for more content that challenges assumptions about history, culture, and human possibility. And remember, the next time you complain about your morning commute, your office job, or your comfortable but boring modern life, think about what it would really be like to wake up in a world where every day brought you face to face with beauty, meaning, danger, and the full intensity of human civilization at its peak. You might not have lasted a day in Tenochtitlan, but the people who built that remarkable city have something to teach us about what human beings are capable of achieving when they work together toward common goals, even when those goals and methods are very different from our own. The past is a foreign country, but it's also a source of inspiration and wisdom for anyone willing to take the time to understand it on its own terms, rather than judging it by contemporary standards. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from the incredible diversity of human experience across time and cultures.